So this morning we're beginning a study of Revelation, but we're taking a roundabout road to get to Revelation. We're going to go through Zechariah in order to get to Revelation. And I hope that you'll see a lot of the similarities between the two and why we're starting with Zechariah. The thesis of our time together this morning is that through Zechariah, Zechariah encourages us to remain hopeful and to persevere. And the reason we need hope and perseverance today is because, to say the least, we live in a time of peril, unrest, chaos, confusion. But so were the times that Zechariah lived. They were exactly the same. In fact, they were so perilous and chaotic that the people to whom Zechariah ministered as a priest had completely and totally lost hope. They were under the thumb of the Persian Empire, and so they had simply lost hope. They no longer had devoted themselves to justice, loving each other, being forgiving and kind. They lost all that because they lost hope. A remnant had returned to Jerusalem from Babylon to rebuild the temple, but had fallen prey to this idea of hopelessness and living under the rule of the Persian Empire. And so they just lost their way, kind of like us today, in a sense. Their hopelessness had caused them to lose sight of that which was most important. And that was the reading that we had today from Zechariah 7, 8, 9, and 10. The idea of loving each other and persevering through the hardest of times. So let's do a little introduction to the book of Zechariah real quick. In order to really understand Zechariah, you have to understand the difference between Eastern thought and Western thought. Easterners viewed the world, and still do to this day, through through word pictures, images, dreams, and visions. In fact, there's a really good book out today called Dreams and Visions. And it is about people in the Middle East to this very day, 2025, who are receiving dreams and visions of the Christ calling them to faith. It's happening this very day. But the Eastern mindset is more open to dreams and visions and pictures and images. Have you been to any of the great cathedrals in Europe? Some of you may have. And when you go into these massive cathedrals with the high vaulted ceilings, what is all over the walls?
Art. Beautiful
art. Art. Wonderful, intricate art. What about the Sistine Chapel? What is on the roof of the Sistine Chapel? Beautiful, some of the most beautiful art in the world. But the art has a specific purpose. If you look at the statuary in a cathedral, you'll note that the statuary actually tells a story. And so if you lived in Cologne, Germany in the 1500s, you were encouraged as a member of that cathedral, that diocese, that parish, You were encouraged to go to the cathedral every day. They wanted you to go into the cathedral and sit, because when you did, what were you going to see? You were going to see the beautiful artwork and the statuary. All of these things were images that told the story of the Bible. Why did they need that? They couldn't read. A lot of them. Some could. But for the most part, the people from the fields and the farms were not literate. So they could, if they went to the cathedral every day, they learned the entire story of the Bible in signs, symbols, and images. And it's to this day, you can go into any cathedral in America even. And what do you see predominantly in a cathedral, Mary? If you went to the cathedral down in DeWitt County, what were some of the things that you saw immediately?
Back home in Missouri.
What?
Back home in Missouri, there was the Stations of the Cross.
That's it. You see statues, you see the cross, you see Jesus, you see Mary, you see images, all telling a story. That's the Eastern way of thinking. In the West, how do we do it? How do we learn in the West?
Words.
Words, outlines, narrative, bullet points. We love the Reader's Digest version, because that's the way we learn. Just give us the facts, ma'am. Just give us the facts. In the East, it was completely different. So, when Zechariah wrote, what did he predominantly use to teach a lesson? Dreams and visions. Do you have dreams that you can remember the next day? If you remember a dream the next day, then it was a big one. It was, you had something to eat the night before. Typically, the dreams flee from us the minute our eyes open. But if that dream lingers, and like Kath and I, sometimes we sit around the breakfast table and tell each other, I had a dream last night, and here is exactly what happened and who was in the dream. They're powerful moments. That's exactly what Zechariah had. He had dreams and visions, and it says that in there, that utilized symbols and images to convey hope to their present day. It's called apocalyptic literature, and it is a genre of literature that not just Zechariah used, but Zechariah used it, Ezekiel, Daniel. Daniel saw a lot of visions. And Revelation is full of dreams and visions. All of these things tell a story, but they don't necessarily tell a story of the far distant future. They have to mean something to the people to whom it was written. Or what does it matter? It had to have meant something to them. Zechariah is a prophecy about the remnant who had returned, and they were in need of hope and perseverance in the face of Persian imperial rule. When John wrote the Revelation, whose rule were they under? Who was the world empire at that time? Rome. They were under Roman imperial rule. And the people needed hope because imminently Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. Let's not get into Revelation right now. It is so important, and I lean heavily on Bema Discipleship Podcast number 68. If you spare time, you want to listen to that. Or Bema Discipleship Podcast 0 for the difference between Eastern and Western thought. We're also going to look at a brief video that describes Zechariah here in just a moment. But anyway, as is true with all apocalyptic literature, the pictures are often symbols that represent God and His people, the trials of the audience, the eventual triumph of good over evil. That's what these images and these visions are trying to teach. Typically, these apocalyptic visions and prophecies end with an assertion of hope that, in fact, if you walk obediently, patiently, and you persevere, everything is going to come together. Don't give up was the message of Zechariah. And in essence, that is exactly what the message of Revelation was for the people of his day. Don't give up hope. Zechariah is quite insistent that if God's people will persevere, their future king will come to them. But for now, they must walk obediently the path that lies before them. Don't quit administering justice. Don't quit loving each other. Don't quit forgiving each other. Those were the important things. He reminded them that their path to recovery from where they were led through Persia. They had to go through Persia. If we understand apocryphal literature, it helps us understand books like Zechariah, Ezekiel, Daniel. But what we love to do, and the huge mistake we make, is that we pick verses out of highly symbolic literature and we develop theology based on those verses. For instance, one in particular in Revelation 20 says that for 1,000 years the devil is going to be thrown into the abyss. Well, we have developed an entire theology based on that verse. But at the same time, the Bible says in Psalms that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. But what about Hill 1001? He doesn't own those cattle? What is the reason for us or for anybody to say, I've told you 1,000 times? What are we using? What figure of speech? Exaggeration. We're using hyperbole. We're exaggerating to make a point. The writers of the New Testament and the Old Testament did exactly the same thing. They used exaggeration and hyperbole to make a point. So, let's look at this video quickly. It's just a few minutes long, and then we'll summarize.
The book of the prophet Zechariah. The book is set after the return of the exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem. And we're told in the book of Ezra that Zechariah and Haggai together challenged and motivated the people to rebuild the temple and look for the fulfillment of God's promises. Now, long ago, Jeremiah the prophet had said that Israel's exile would last for 70 years, and that afterwards God would restore his presence to a new temple and bring his kingdom and the rule of the Messiah over all nations. The dates at the beginning of this book tell us that those 70 years are almost up. But life back in the land was hard, and it seemed like none of these promises were going to come true. Why? And the book of Zechariah offers an explanation. It has a fairly clear design. There's an introduction which sets the tone for a large collection of Zechariah's dream visions, and that's concluded by chapters 7 and 8. And then this is followed by two more large collections of poetry and prophecy. Let's just dive in and see how the book works. It begins with Zechariah's challenge to his generation to turn back to God and not be like their ancestors leaders who rebelled and refused to listen to the earlier prophets, which landed them in exile. And so now the returned exiles respond positively to Zechariah. They repent and humble themselves before God, or so it seems. The next large section is a collection of 8 nighttime visions that Zechariah experienced. And just to prepare you, these are full of very bizarre, strange images, a lot like your dreams. The idea that God communicates to people through symbolic dreams is very old. It goes back to the book of Genesis. The dreams of Jacob, or Joseph, or Pharaoh. These gave meaning to current events at the time, but they also gave a window into the future. And so Zechariah has his own dreams now, and they've been arranged in this really cool symmetrical design. The first and the last visions are about 4 horsemen each. They're like rangers patrolling the world on God's behalf, and it's a representation of God's attentive watch over the nations. Their report is that the world is at peace. And in Zechariah's day, this refers to how God raised up Persia to conquer Babylon and bring peace. And so the question now arises. The 70 years of Israel's exile are almost up. Is now the time for the Messianic kingdom in Jerusalem? And God responds by saying that he's determined to fulfill those promises, but he leaves the question of timing unanswered. The second and seventh visions are paired because they're both reflections on Israel's past sin that led up to the exile. So the second vision is about these horns that symbolize the nations that attacked and then scattered Israel, Assyria and Babylon. But then these horns or empires are themselves scattered by a group of blacksmiths, an image for Persia. The seventh dream is about a woman in a basket, and we're told that she's a symbol of the centuries of Israel's covenant rebellion. And then this woman is carried off to Babylon by other women who carry the basket flying with stork wings. This is so strange. The third and sixth visions are paired, as they're both about the rebuilding of a new Jerusalem. So a man is measuring the city. It's an image of God's promise that Jerusalem will be rebuilt and become a beacon to the nations who will join God's people in worship. And then the sixth dream is about a scroll that flies around the New Jerusalem, punishing thieves and liars. The idea being that the New Jerusalem is a place that's purified from sin by the Scriptures. The fourth and fifth visions are at the center of this collection, and they're about the 2 key leaders among the returned exiles. So Joshua, the high priest, and then Zerubbabel, the royal descendant of David. So Joshua had been symbolically wearing Israel's sin in the form of these dirty clothes. But then those are taken off, and he's given new clothes and a new turban, a symbol of God's grace and forgiveness. And then an angel tells Joshua that if he remains faithful to God, he will lead his people, and Joshua will become a symbol of the future Messianic king. The other vision is about 2 olive trees that supply oil to this elaborate gold lamp, which itself is a symbol of God's watchful eye over his people. And these 2 trees symbolize the 2 anointed leaders, Joshua and then Zerubbabel, who's leading the temple rebuilding efforts. And God says that success will not come to this new temple if it's the result only of political maneuvering. Rather, these 2 leaders must be dependent upon the work of God's Spirit. The visions come to a close with a bonus vision from the prophet, and it picks up the themes of the central 4th and 5th visions. It's Joshua, the high priest again, and he's given a crown and presented as a symbol of the future Messiah, who will also be a priest over God's kingdom. And then Zechariah closes it all out, saying that all of these visions will be fulfilled only if the current generation is faithful to God and obeys the terms of the covenant. And so altogether, these 3 visions emphasize how the coming of the Messianic kingdom is conditional upon this generation being faithful to God, which leads to the conclusion of the dreams. It's another challenge from Zechariah, and a group of Israelites come, and they've been mourning over the former temple's destruction for nearly 70 years. And they ask him, is it time to stop grieving? I mean, is God's kingdom going to come very soon? And Zechariah again reminds them of how their ancestors rejected God's call through the prophets, which led to the exile. And so he challenges them too. He says, this generation will see the Messianic kingdom only if they pursue justice and peace and remain faithful to the covenant. So in other words, Zechariah reverses their question. He asks, are you going to become the kind of people who are ready to receive and participate in God's coming kingdom? And that question is left just hanging there. The people don't answer, and the book just moves on. And so we come to the final sections that are very different from chapters 1 to 8. Each section is a kaleidoscopic collage of poems and images about the future Messianic kingdom. So the first one, chapters 9 to 11, describe the coming of the humble messianic king who's riding a donkey into the New Jerusalem to establish God's kingdom over the nations. But then, all of a sudden, this king, he's symbolized as a shepherd over the flock of Israel, and then he's rejected, first by his own people, but then also by their leaders, who are also symbolized as shepherds. And so God hands Israel over to these corrupt shepherds. And it raises a question. Will Israel's rejection of their king last forever? In the final section, chapters 12 to 14, say no. It's another mosaic of poems and images about the future messianic kingdom. And they depict the New Jerusalem as a place where God's justice will finally confront and defeat evil among the nations. It's very similar to the same themes in Prophet Joel or Ezekiel. But then God also will confront the rebellion within the hearts of his own people. He's going to pour out his Spirit on them, he says, so that they can repent and grieve over the fact that they have rebelled and rejected their messianic shepherd. The final chapter concludes with the New Jerusalem as the gathering point for all of the nations. And then this city becomes a new Garden of Eden, and there's a river of living water flowing out of the temple, bringing healing to all of creation, and that's how the book ends. And so Zechariah just leads you to ponder the connection between chapters 1 through 8 and 9 to 14. And the point seems to be that this future messianic kingdom of the book's second half will only come when God's people are faithful to the covenant, the point of the first half. Reading the book of Zechariah is a wild ride. These visions and poems are full of startling imagery, and they do not follow a linear flow of thought. And that's part of the point. It's like history and our lives. It doesn't always fit into neat, orderly patterns. But the prophets offer us glimpses of God's hand at work, guiding history towards his own purposes. And so ultimately, Zechariah invites us to look above the chaos and hope for the coming of God's kingdom, which should motivate faithfulness in the present. And that's what the book of Zechariah is all about.
Well, that's as muddy as it can be.
Do we have to take a test?
No test. But you can see how Zechariah functions with the dreams and visions and images, and how it would be so easy to be caught up into the idea of taking these and transposing them onto current events and saying, aha, see, this was foretold. But then, what did it mean to the people to whom it was written to? That's the first question to ask. For instance, one of the passages that is read almost every Palm Sunday in churches everywhere is Zechariah 9 through 10. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations." What do we say about that verse usually? It was a prophetic verse that was fulfilled by Jesus in his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, riding on the back of the foal of a donkey. But was it? Or was the purpose really written to the people of Zechariah's day, who were wanting so desperately to get out from under Persian rule? They were looking for a messianic king that would come in power and use might. And his message to them was, no. You're not going to get out from under Persian rule by war and power and might. You're going to get out of your king is going to be humble and come into Jerusalem mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He said it's through humility and justice and love and forgiveness. That's how you're going to overthrow Persian rule. So But we have taken that verse and transposed it, though, when in reality, that wasn't. That's not what it meant to the people to whom it was written. So, Revelation. When Zechariah opens, you have people walking through, or you have a man walking through a grove of myrtle trees in this vision. When Revelation opens, where do you have a man walking?
Desolation of Isle of Patmos.
It was the revelation that was given on the Isle of Patmos. He's walking through golden candlesticks. So in Zechariah, he's walking through myrtle trees. In Revelation, it's golden candlesticks. In Zechariah, you have these visions of horns. What do you have in Revelation? How many horns? 4 horns. You have 4 horsemen in Revelation. You have 4 horsemen in Zechariah. Zechariah speaks about a plumb line, a measuring line, measuring the New Jerusalem. What does Revelation talk about? The same exact thing. That the New Jerusalem is going to be built using a plumb line, meaning it's going to be done right this time. In Zechariah, the priest was going to have clean garments. In Revelation, you have people that are given robes of white, clean garments because their robes have been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Zechariah talks about these flying scrolls. Well, so does Revelation talk about flying scrolls. Why would you have 4 horsemen in Zechariah, 4 horsemen in Revelation? What does that symbolize? Why 4? Why? What? Yeah.
Every direction.
Yeah, every direction. North, south, east, and west. There were 4 directions. They covered the whole, both in Zechariah and in Revelation. All those images that you see in Revelation, we've seen before. Revelation does not have a brand new vision. The way to understand Revelation is to understand the Old Testament, is to go to the apocalyptic literature of the Old Testament and read it and apply it, and then you'll understand the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation almost has more Old Testament direct quotes than the book of Hebrews does. And every other word in that book is a quotation of the Old Testament. Like the video said, Zechariah is a wild ride, like a roller coaster. It doesn't go anywhere in a straight line. But isn't that the life that we live anyway? Is our life linear and everything perfect about it? No. We're up and then we're down. And things go terribly bad and things go wonderfully well. Life does not fall into neat, ordinary patterns. Zechariah has a very non-linear flow of thought. The same is true of the book of Revelation. The point of Zechariah is that we're invited through his dreams and visions and through his thoughts to look above the chaos and the confusion of the world that we live in and persevere in doing good and loving each other and administering justice. But live in hope by doing the very best we can. Our takeaway is to persevere in hope. That was the takeaway of Zechariah. That's our takeaway today. That we persevere through whatever life throws our way. And we do so in the hope that in the end, God reigns supreme.